speakers are Leon Shor from Ben-Gurion University and Michal Marmorstein from the Hebrew University. Please, Leon and Michal.
Thank you, Yael. So to tie very nicely with previous presentation by Jack, meaning interaction, as we have come to acknowledge, is hardly reducible to mental representation and lexico-encyclopedic knowledge. Rather, it is tied to communicative intentions as made publicly available by speakers and to understandings as evidenced by recipients' responses. But how can we access these intentions and understandings? Semantic work, Depperman writes, becomes observable if semantics is not only used as a resource, but if participants specify, generalize, correct, or negotiate the meaning of some expression or some description produced before in that interaction. In this talk, we center on a particular practice for doing semantic work, a same-turn self-repeat that serves to retract a formulation just produced. We look at sequences in which a first production of a lexical item is immediately followed by another production of the same item, however, with an observably different prosodic and embodied design. Specifically, the second production is delivered in lower pitch and a fall-to-low movement, and it is coterminous with a particular hand gesture or facial expression or shift in body posture. We understand these second productions as modifications of the alignment taken up by producers toward their previously chosen lexicon, specifically lesser endorsement of their previously chosen lexicon. We base our analysis on a corpus of unscripted and live interactions coming from Israeli Hebrew media talk. While the corpus features various retraction sequences, we decided to focus on the most compact practices of self-repeat with no further lexical or grammatical modification. The self-repeat we are concerned with has been noticed en passant, for instance, with such examples as this much cited one. So this comes from Shegleff, Jefferson, and Sachs. This man. Commenters refer to the exposed nature of this type of correction that explicitly locates the trouble source by reproducing it, so fellow. For instance, Lerner and Kitzinger write, by repeating the trouble source formulation, the speaker frames it as the wrong thing to have said and highlights the fact that she is dismissing it in favor of a replacement. However, based on our Hebrew data, we observe that the second production of the lexical item is not only means to expose the repairable, but through its multimodal modification to implement repair. A replacement could, but doesn't have to follow the repetition. When it does, the corrected version is explicit. When not, it is left to be inferred. In producing such repeats, participants display a weaker endorsement of a previously chosen lexicon and problematize its use in the context. In what follows, we shall look at 4 different occurrences of the retraction self-repeat practice. We move from the most compact and fleeting use to increasingly more pronounced cases in which the repair is most disruptive to the progressivity of the action launched in the turn. So here's our first example. The participants are Omer and Tamara, who are co-hosting a cooking program. We joined this video just as they have finished preparing a fried cauliflower dish. Let's watch.
סיסי, אני אגיד לך מה.
בבקשה, מה?
תני ביס.
טוב, זה חם, אני הולכת לעשות את הטעות של עומר.
הטריק שלי, כן. הטריק שלי.
מה אומרים? אם אני צורחת זה כי זה חם? זה המשפט?
כן. אם את...
Okay, so Omer serves the dish to Tamara, and she, upon touching it, comments on how hot it is and that tasting it will be a mistake that Omer is known to be doing. Overlapping with the second part of her comment, Omer comes in and formulates the same doing as a trick. He moves on to confirm with a minimal yes, but then in a subsequent increment, he repeats the formulation, my trick. Notice the prosodic design of the second production of my trick. It is produced in a lower pitch, fall to low pitch movement, subsequent pause, longer duration, and a change of accentuation. So from my trick to my trick. This design suggests that the self-repeat performs an action that is complete in itself, implementing a repair of the formulation. Also, the self-repeat is accompanied by an overall backward movement of the body, widened eyes, and raised eyebrows. Especially notable here is the backward sagittal gesture of the right hand. While usually associated with the expression of temporality or the elapse of time, here it appears to iconically represent the action of downgrading. This increment ends the turn, and the talk moves to Tamara's next inquiry about how to perform the trick, which is apparently to scream that the food is burning hot. By repeating and multimodally recontextualizing the formulation, my trick, Omer seems to problematize its adequacy as a descriptor of the situation. This retraction may be occasioned by the fact that Tamara has just proposed an alternative description of it as a mistake. We notice that a replacement of my trick is not proposed such that the alternative, a weaker and perhaps a less self-flattering formulation, so it's not my trick, is to be inferred.
We move now to a more articulate production of the repeat. The excerpt comes from a personal interviews program. Speaker is an Israeli actress describing how she was once forced to stay in New York due to bad weather conditions. Let's watch.
הייתה לי דירה מקסימה בגרמרסי שבניו יורק, ונתקעתי שם. נתקעתי חודש וחצי בניו יורק, והזמנתי את תום שיבוא להיות איתי בצילומים.
After describing favorably her living conditions in New York, the speaker continues to report about her inability to leave the city by saying, "Nitkati sham," I got stuck there. Following a short silence, she repeats the verb nitkati, I got stuck. Here too, the repeat is delivered in a lower pitch, fall to low pitch movement, subsequent pause, and longer duration. Coextensively with the repeat, the speaker produces the quoting gesture, a gesture that serves to demarcate a selected formulation as the words of another, while indexing the current producer's distancing from it. The speaker retroactively attributes her initial production of nitkati to another voice, thereby distancing herself and backing down on this formulation. The gesture is clearly articulated into its preparation phase, stroke, post-stroke, hold, and retraction, which results in a long duration. This articulated and elongated performance brings into focus the action of repair and provides a noticeable display of accountability for a presumably inapposite choice of words. Here too, an explicit replacement or revision does not follow. Rather, the alternative to the negatively construed nitkati, I got stuck, is implied, and as such can license the subsequent, though now qualified, use of the same term. We move now to a case in which an explicit replacement does follow the repetition. This excerpt comes from a daily talk show. The interviewee is a contestant in the Israeli Ninja Warrior show who has reached the final. The interviewer inquires about his mental preparedness to compete with the strongest ninjas of the show. She concludes her question with, "Is this a fight?" Let's watch.
פייט?
זה בהחלט פייט, אבל זה לא משהו שאני מפחד ממנו, ואני חושב שרוב הנינג'ות, כמה שיותר תביאו להם אויבים יותר אויבים. מתמודדים יותר חזקים, ככה זה ייתן להם מוטיבציה להיות יותר טובים.
הנה, חשפת את האמת, זה מלחמה אמיתית. הגישה. מלחמה אמיתית.
In response to, "Is it a fight?" the speaker starts with a strong confirmation, it's certainly a fight, but then moves on to claim that he's nevertheless not afraid. He substantiates his claim by generalizing and referring to the mindset of most ninjas who prefer to compete with strong rivals. Ohad then initiates a comparative construction, "the more you will," in which he refers to the contestants as oivim, enemies. However, before completing the construction, he halts to issue repair. He does that by repeating the noun phrase oivim, enemies, and after a silence, replacing it with stronger contestants. The repeat, through its multimodal design, does more than locating the trouble source. First, as in all other cases, it's delivered in a lower pitch, fall to low pitch movement, and a subsequent unfilled pause. Second, we notice that the repeat is preceded by eye closure and eyebrow raising, and that during the ensuing pause, Ohad enacts a lip bite and begins to smile and tilt his head. This embodied conduct appears to convey embarrassment about the inappropriate use of enemies, which may connote a too combative and violent meaning that is not congenial with a sports event. Indeed, this leads to an explicit lexical revision. Interestingly, the interviewer responds to the repeat with laughter, even before the replacement is implemented, thus acknowledging the embarrassed position of the speaker. After the replacement, she issues a teasing remark that suggests some skepticism regarding the authenticity of the replacement, proposing instead that the speaker's initial formulation testified to the genuine relationship among the ninja contestants. In response, Ohad acknowledges that he's being teased by laughing, but rejects the interviewer's suggestion. Arguably, the fact that the repair is exposed by the repetition makes it vulnerable to further topicalization by the recipient, who can decline, as in this case, to accept the correction as a purely semantic correction. We move now to our final example, in which the self-repeat is followed by an account which further breaks the progressivity of the action launched in the turn. This excerpt comes from a personal interviews program hosting a well-known Israeli journalist who talks about the arduous process of becoming a foster parent after having undergone an unsuccessful IVF therapy. Let's watch.
ההוא של ההפריות, ויתרתם והלכתם באמת, הלכתם. אפשר לחשוב שלהפוך למשפחת אומנה בישראל זה piece of cake. אמרו לכם שלאמץ אתם לא יכולים בגלל שגם מבוגר מדי.
The interviewer refers to the speaker's decision to cease the attempts to become pregnant and try to become a foster parent instead. He initially formulates this as "you gave up and went." However, he does not complete the sentence, but holds to issue repair on the formulation "you went," halachtem. He does that by repeating the verb halachtem in a lower pitch, fall to low pitch movement, and a subsequent pause. The repeat is preceded by eyebrow raising and followed by the raising of the left hand in the sagittal plane, with the fingertips pointing upwards and slightly tilting. This gesture is conventionally associated in Israeli Hebrew culture with the indexing of downgrading and belittling. Indeed, right after, the interviewer makes the comment as if becoming a foster parent in Israel is a piece of cake. This is an explicit account for why the choice of halachtem, you went, is inadequate, since it's associated with an easy walk in the park task rather than with the arduous process that they're talking about. The recipient responds to the repair affiliatively, first with a smile and then with an explicit and upgraded reformulation of the event as a nightmare, thereby acknowledging the interviewer's well-justified retraction of the casual description. In this case, a replacement is not offered and topic talk is not resumed. Rather, the repair is topicalized and constructed as self-directed criticism for using a too casual and insensitive wording.
So, looking at all four cases together, we see the consistent and variable features of this repair practice. Recurring is the exact verbal repetition and its prosodic design, lower pitch, fall to low pitch movements, subsequent pause, and a longer duration relative to the first production. The embodied resources, on the other hand, are variegated and include manual gestures, facial gestures, and shift in body posture. The repair can consist of the repeat alone, or it can be followed by replacement, or it can be extended by an account which further suspends the action in progress. What is common to this practice and the retraction of larger propositions as described in the literature is a display of accountability for what is appropriate, for saying what is appropriate in a particular interactional context. However, in the case of our compact practice, accountability clearly does not target factual or logical correctness, as in the case of more elaborate practices, conceding practices, but it targets what can be described as relational correctness. Moreover, our practice does not react to an actual challenge, but to an imagined or foreshadowed one. Thus, it is not heard as defensive, but as self-critical or apologetic. The practice we've been looking at provides further evidence for how redoings in conversation, and again tying to resonance, reassertions, reproductions, are not just repeats, but always include new aspects of meaning. In our case, these meanings are not lexicalized but expressed through vocal and visual resources, showing thus the complementary nature of language and body in social interaction. Thank you, and looking forward to your comments.
Thank you very much, Michal and Leon, for this wonderful talk. And the floor is open for questions. Comments? Okay. All right. Yatam, yes.
I was wondering if you've examples of other repair done this way?
Yeah, we have, but it's probably something slightly different. So we do have an example where when it is, what you mean by other initiated, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have an example as such, and there the form that the initiation of repair takes is of an astonished question. So a question that shows astonishment, the one that were described by Zelting. And then, yeah, and then you have this back down or retraction that is triggered by someone from the outside. But Leon, correct me if I'm wrong, most of our cases are self-initiated, right?
Right. We also have one case where the other proposes a formulation and then the speaker accepts it and then retracts from it. So the origin of the initial formulation can be in the recipient's prior words, not just in the speaker's prior words. But we're still in the process of expanding our collection, so we might find such cases in the future.
Also, similar cases in English were recently discussed in IPRA by Bolden and Hepburn.
They had a whole project about exposed,
yeah,
right? Yeah, we were overlapping, so unfortunately we could not attend her talk, but their talk, yeah, but we'll get the materials.
Okay, Hila, I think you were next.
Yeah, hello. Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. I wanted to ask about one of your conclusions that, and I think which was the previous, the last slide that you mentioned, that it's not something that has to do with the other speaker. It's something that comes from the speaker, and then it's you had some line there saying that it's not. I think that it comes from the speaker itself.
Right. It does not react to an overt challenge. So there are always things going on that are not verbalized. And for sure, so this is what we suggested with the first example with my trick. So he was overlapping with her when she formulated that as a mistake. And right after the overlap, he retracts from a trick sheli. No, it was a trick sheli. Yeah, it could be occasioned by something that the other party did, but not necessarily, and in most of our cases, certainly not by an explicit, an overt, a verbalized challenge. So yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about the example with the enemies in the interview. And I thought that the reason he took back his enemies was because of the interview and because of the, that once he said enemies, he knew what is going to be the reaction of the interviewer. And I think it has a lot of to do with her reaction that he took it back. So I think, sorry.
I'm not convinced that this is, in fact, this is a very interesting and telling example, because what happens there, if you will read, more closely the entire thing, the transcript, or watch it again, of course, then you can notice that there are two agendas. She tries to frame that as a fight. And I don't know if this is, if later he uses enemies as, being primed. I'm careful to use this term, but occasions, let's call that occasions, by this formulation of this event as a fight. So she has this agenda and she pushes it later. She says, yeah, but now you expose it is a war, זאת מלחמה אמיתית. And he constantly tries to retract. He laughs, he says, no, no. So he has a different agenda. And I think that it is his own initiative not to buy into her framing of the event as a fight. Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think it has a lot to do with the interviewer and not with his own stance. But thank you very much.
Okay, Jack, yeah.
So I noticed that at least some of the examples you presented, at least one seemed to involve playfulness. And I'm wondering if this kind of embodied action that kind of foregrounds the link between two utterances regularly shows up in connection with playfulness or humor?
Well, what we see is, different kinds of stances, I'd say. I don't know, perhaps with the first example, it was more of playfulness. But then with the fourth example, it was very far from playfulness, was a super serious talk, right? They're talking about something very hard, a very difficult experience. And I think that he's, is really sorry that he used this casual, insensitive, what is later oriented to as such. And I'm not sure that this is playfulness there, at least, and also not with, kind of the embarrassed stance. Leon, perhaps you want to say something about the embarrassment in the Oivim examples, because you looked very carefully into that.
Yeah, I think it's our only, or maybe one of two examples that shows embarrassment. And we were struggling with how to describe the term embarrassment and whether we can claim that he's really embarrassed, but we haven't reached a conclusion. But we thought that the embodied conduct in this case contributed to our feeling that there was some embarrassment involved. And specifically, we had the lip bite in this case and some laughter also. So I think that the embodied conduct contributes to our interpretation of the specific stance involved in each example.